I had an intro and now I've forgotten it.
I was gonna say you're leaving quite a long silence on this
Yeah, I was
one.
like, wait. Um, it is what it is, I suppose. Folks, welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. This is Graphic Policies Tabletop RPG podcast. Uh, Incidentally, Anko doesn't know this, but we are brought to you by the Comic Hunter in Atlantic, Canada. Um, I don't really have the rest of this ready to go, but I'm Alex and this is Anko, and he
And
knows
we are
stuff
on
about.
fire today.
We are like Anko knows stuff about RPGs, and I generally don't. And apparently, I don't know anything about introducing a show either.
You're supposed to be the podcast guy.
Yeah,
Like,
I honestly like that's the kind of intro. I'm like, do I just restart it? Yeah, maybe we do. Maybe we do.
all right.
Incidentally, Jacob said, "Yeah, no, if you want to, like, we can have a sign up for you in the shop if you want." Which is why I was saying we need to listen to the first one on the off chance that certain people
Start
act.
listening.
Yeah, because if they, I mean, the thing is, if they do, they do, and
Mm.
I'm sure they're not unaware. Anyway, I'm gonna give another 5 second pause and then go from there. Folks, welcome back to Ready Nerd Go Graphic Policies Tabletop RPG podcast. My name's Alex. Anko hasn't spoken yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. We are your hosts. We were planning on having a guest on today. Unfortunately, the guest has some kind of crud. I think it's actually a con crud. He was at a con a couple of weeks ago
Yep.
and is still getting over it. So it did leave us with a bit more of a open-ended show to plan. We are apparently. Oh fuck! I should have put that in at the beginning. God damn it!
Do you want to go for
Yeah,
round whatever
we
we're on?
I don't even know yet. The Benadryl are kicking him. That's the problem. I'm going to blame the Benadryl and my cat who's walking on stuff that he shouldn't be walking on. Right, 2 minutes in. I need to make a note of this somewhere that I've got to. Folks, welcome back to Ready Nerd Go Graphic Policies Tabletop RPG podcast. We are brought to you as of this episode from the Comic Hunter in Maritime, Canada. It's at comichunter.net. Or you can go to one of the various shops in Charlottetown, Moncton, or Fredericton in New Brunswick or PEI. My name's Alex. Anko hasn't spoken yet.
Hello, all.
And we did initially have a guest ready to go today, but the guest has still is still recovering from some form of walking flu and obviously doesn't feel great and the throat isn't really ready to talk to us for an extended period of time. So what that means is that the episode we didn't need to plan for, we now have a plan for, and it was very much a crap, we don't have a guest, what do we talk about? And then the plan we had initially we forgot, so now we're on plan 3. I don't like saying plan C because that implies we only have 24 plans. When in
Oh.
reality, we may only have one and a half at best.
But keep them guessing.
Exactly. So the docket we have up ready for today is character weaponry. And there is going to be a very obvious slant toward Pathfinder, D&D, that sort of thing, where it's more of a fantasy-esque weaponry. Swords, axes, that sort of shit. That's not to say that you can't have other weaponry, and we'll probably get into that as we go. But if you're looking for laser weapons, then that might be another episode down the road when we look at more of a science fiction based game. Now, full disclosure, I've barely touched any of those games, so that would be a lot of heavy lifting on Anko's part, which is why we're focusing more on weaponry. Because even if I haven't played a lot of the games, I've read a lot of books that I can bring part of that to. So that said, how are you?
I am nursing a hot tea that is giving me the energy to get through the day right now.
My tea is gone slightly lukewarm at this point, but that's what you get for trying to start the episode 3 times in a row and failing 2 out of 3 times.
Yeah, I mean, it's a go. It's I think it's gonna be a fun episode today, especially because for folks, generally speaking, either I'll come up with a topic and flesh it out before we get to it, or Alex will have a burst of, "Ooh, hey, I really want to talk about this," and it's like, "Oh yeah, we can do a lot with it." And today is one of Alex's topic ideas, so I'm really curious to see where he's thinking about going on, because like he mentioned previously, he's still fairly new to all this.
Hmm.
I always find a lot of fun when he brings a topic forward, just because it's really interesting to see a newer perspective on, ooh, hey, this is the type of stuff I want to talk about. Because when you're in any form of hobby for a while, you can get a little lost in the weeds when it comes to things that you want to talk about versus things that like the average person would want to talk about when they talk about the subject. So it's always kind of fun when somebody goes, hey, but what about this? Oh, right. I hadn't thought about
Yeah,
that in years.
I guess you do need to learn how to walk before you can fly.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I think that's why having the notes somewhat detailed in for the show as to what we're talking about makes sense. We were talking about before the episode that maybe having the quotes in the title probably wasn't our best idea initially, but it serves its purpose and it's going to continue serving its purpose for a little while yet.
Yeah.
That said, weaponry. We when you're creating a character, generally you come up with a backstory, etc., etc. And now I remember creating a goblin called Ben who had a club. Generally, when you create a character, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mm.
you get like a small selection of things you can choose from. Even if you want a magical two-handed broadsword down the road, you can't get that initially unless there's specific circumstances, right?
Yeah. So obviously, as I say to pretty much every question you ask me, it depends on the system. But for the most part, you
Yeah,
are
touche.
correct that, and especially because in the more narrow niche that we're looking at of like, D20 style fantasy RPGs, generally what happens, especially in more modern RPGs, is you'll be given like uh, sample gear to start off with. So like if you're playing a warrior, you might say it might tell you, hey, choose like one military style weapon, or you start with either a battle axe or a long sword, and then you have a small amount of money that you can get basic equipment, but nobody is starting the game with like their level 1 fighter and going, hey, I want to start with +5 vorpal blade. I mean, people definitely say that and try to get it, but any GM worth their salt is going to laugh and tell them no.
Yeah, I feel like there's always a if you're starting off an adventure, you want to make sure you have something close to starting equipment. Now, that if I think there is exceptions to that if you're playing a Witcher game, well, your Witcher needs to have at least a steel and silver sword.
Yeah.
If you're basing it off the game, the video games, I think the books Geralt generally only uses a steel sword.
Hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the in the books he will only usually carry one sword at a time. The other sword is very specific to certain things because it's more valuable, etc. You're not going to cut attack someone with armor with a silver
Yeah.
sword.
But like
Anyway, I
that is actually a really good example to use though, because like in the Witcher tabletop RPG, your Witcher does start with both a steel and a silver sword, and they're the only class in the entire game that starts with that type of weaponry. Nobody else starts with anything similar to it at all, which playing a
no
more martial class, you will usually have access right from the get-go to more martial style weaponry.
no one should start with it. You're right. Now that that being said, so if you're I, I suppose this also goes back to character creation too, in that if I'm gonna play a using The Witcher as an example, if I'm going to play a town guard who's been recently fired, you could reasonably assume that the guard has a sword, maybe a coat of mail, maybe a
Mm.
shield. Now, maybe the mail and the helmet were supplied by the town, so he doesn't actually have those, but the sword and shield were his own, so you can at least start with a sword, and you can make a justification for starting with a sword and shield. And I think that's what my point is that generally, yes, you start with, like you said, a martial weapon, etc., depending on your class. But if you can make a justification and a valid justification as to why you start with a bit more, and the GM is like, you know what, that makes sense. I'm going to allow you as a fire town guard to say that, you know what, I walked away with my guard equipment and now I can never go back to that city because I stole it. I'm fine with that. That makes sense as to why you have equipment that you shouldn't normally have.
Yeah, it's tying your character into the world around them in a way that makes sense for the setting.
Exactly. Now, what you're not likely to have is a town guard who has dwarven armor, because there's no logical way that you can get that without either a serious amount of role playing or that. Well, where did you get the armor? Well, I found it. Well, why does it fit you? Well, I paid a dwarf to make it bigger. How did you pay a dwarf? With money. Where did you get the money? I stole it. From where?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it's
this is
it's
way too many logical leaps for you to have custom fitted dwarf armor. However, battered up chainmail or leather armor from being a town guard, yeah, that makes sense.
it's also, just from the GM's perspective, like we've we we have played with people that try to get higher end gear right off the get go with, let's say flimsy narrative justification for it. And as the GM, something that you really need to be concerned of, there's two real things that you need to be concerned about with players trying that kind of thing. Because if you really want to let them do it, fill your boots. But you need to worry about, them throwing off the power curve of the group. Because like if one person is wearing armor that they can't be hit by anything, then you need to either make everything more difficult, which is going to make everything more lethal for everybody else, or you need to just ignore it and accept the fact that, oh, this character's functionally invulnerable. There's nothing I can do about it.
And and I suppose that would also then open up a narrative option in terms of, and I realize we're talking about weaponry and how you get weaponry right now, but I recognize that if you allow someone to have something with a flimsy narrative reason, well, then they've got to be prepared to deal with that in the game in a narrative response. If, for example, you have an ex town guard who has custom made dwarven armor, and all of a sudden, like, I don't know, I can't remember the Witcher setting, but say a dwarven special policeman comes up. Folks, again, I barely played The Witcher. I'm making stuff up as I go to make my analogy what makes sense.
Please do not
So
crucify me.
yeah. So if you have a dwarven special policeman comes up and say, "Hey, where did you get that armor?" and we have that conversation that I ran through a few minutes ago, if you can't come up with a justifiable excuse that actually makes sense to the GM who is creating the NPC doing that, well, then you then have to deal with what happens as a consequence. Well, if you can't justify why you have dwarven armor, maybe the dwarves take it from you.
Yeah,
Maybe the guard in the next city takes it from you when he finds out that you stole from the bank in that city. Like, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. And if you don't like that, maybe you don't try and bend the rules as much. Maybe you're like, you know what? Does this make sense? No. Or what would make sense? You have chainmail because you're an ex-town guard that got fired and you ran away while you were still wearing it. I'll allow
yeah.
that. Now, we're getting away from the point of weaponry and we're starting to go on to one of our apparently more famous tangents. When it comes to starting class weaponry, generally in the books you're going to have the options with which you can pick, or like Anko said, you can pay a bit more from the gold that you get to start out with to get a different sword. What do you do if I'm going to try not to sneeze before I finish my question. What do you do if you play a character and you really want them to have a sword, but you're not strong enough for the sword?
Well, there's a few different things that you can do with it. It kind of depends on how dedicated you are to that idea. Like if your mental image for your character is that they are a swordsman, but when you make them, you don't make them with whatever the system requires you to have given them to make them a good swordsman, then honestly that one's kind of on you. Like I'm gonna be blunt on that one. Like I've seen people as oh, I want to play somebody who's like a really good swordsman, and then they'll make their base class and like all their attributes around it related to being like a mage or something. I have actually seen this one, and it's just
Uh-huh.
and it's just like, okay, but like if you want to be a swordsman, play the soldier class that you start with a sword and you're good with a sword.
I remember when you were helping me create the Goblin Ben, and I said, look, I already want him to be a tiny little fucker with a giant weapon,
Yeah.
and otherwise he would not be strong enough to do this. So I think he started out at a level 1 or 2 just based on what the GM at the time was doing.
Hmm.
And so you said, right, so you want this trait, this trait. That means you can carry big weapons without a penalty. I'm like, great. So now he's running around with a halberd, which looks hilarious in my mind as this little 3 foot goblin with a 6.5 foot weapon.
Yeah.
It it's funny to me, and that's why I think the GM allowed me to get away with it a little bit more because it's funny.
Oh,
And
it's fantastic. Like my current character in my other Pathfinder group, the entire concept of him was I wanted to be a little guy that could like suplex dragons,
yeah, and
and
I
the
think
build has been entirely towards making that work.
that is amazing.
Right?
And and I think that's the kind of thing where you can get more of a leeway from the GM. Now, I'm I've always been the person who, well, using the goblin as an example, one of the people on the table was like, oh, hey, if you take this trait, then you can do A, B, and C, and it's that much more advantageous to you in combat. I'm like, while I recognize that, it would make no sense for him to do that because I can't explain that away in my head canons for the character.
Yeah.
Instead, I'm going to take this absolutely useless trait that makes more sense for him. And like, oh, like it just fits the character better. Like, yeah, but I'm like, I for me it makes more sense that he's just happens to have found a random item we need in the garbage 3 weeks ago and forgot about it. Then he can turn invisible.
Right.
They're,
But
they're examples. I don't actually remember if that's what the traits were, but
no, that's actually pretty close to being on the nose. But to pull it back to, what if you want to start with a sword? The the other thought process I would have behind it, besides, make a character who can start with one, is the other thing is like, and I run into this a lot with new players, is like, having goals is good. If you want your character to be capable of wielding a sword, but you don't want to play a character who starts with one or who is capable of wielding one at the start, that's great. That is a goal for your character to aspire to in the game. They
that
can, you can put your whatever skills you need into making yourself competent with a sword. You can have an actual goal for your character to be like, hey, I want to own a sword, or I want to own this particular sword.
it,
And then that's a driving force for your character, which is
it's
great both from your perspective and from the GM's perspective.
yeah, it's very much a echoes along to the farm boy becomes a warrior trope in fantasy, and
Exactly.
I think it's fantastic. It makes sense. So we've talked a bit about getting ready to choose your weapon or having the goal that you want to make sure that you don't build a mage to become a swordsman or build a mage to become a tank. Be ready to actually have your weapon of choice.
Yeah.
But how do you decide on what your weapon is? And I suppose this is all you're gonna tell me it just boils down to personal preference. Like
Well,
I'm not a ranged person. I've not really been a fan of range combat. I don't
mm,
know why. It's just personal preference. I've always rather be melee, so I'm more likely to go for an axe or a sword or whatever. And I know you enough at this point that you're going to say, well, it really just boils down to what you as a player think is cool.
you're actually close, but not 100% on the money there.
I'm
Because
kind of glad, because otherwise that would be a really short segment.
no, there's two primary ways that people tend to come at it. One is just, I think swords are fucking cool and I want to use a sword. The other, so like, the stylistic perspective of looking at it. The other style of looking at it is from the more mechanical perspective of it, where it's like, okay, I want to be able to do this specific thing, and this weapon makes more sense for me being able to do it. Like, if you really want to play a ranged character, for example, like, you're going to look at the ranged weaponry, and that's where, that's going to narrow down where you start looking. And then if it's like, hey, I want to, be like a character who is like really strong but uses ranged weaponry, then it's like, okay, you're going to be wanting to look more like thrown stuff. So you might be wanting to look at, like a throwing axe or javelins or something along those lines, where, you can use your strength to improve the weapon. While, if you're wanting to play like, an agile, like flitty little melee fighter, you're probably not going to want to use like a big stompy warhammer, because that's just not the style of character you're looking to play.
Yeah, and I feel like this again goes back to a bit of character creation. You want to have an idea as a whole as to where you want to start with, if not finish with, in terms of, like you said, I want to play a big, strong guy that, but it also has ranged options, throwing weapons. Now, I remember we were creating a cat. You and were helping me create a character, and why don't you try something different? I'm like, well, I wouldn't mind, maybe some kind of magic. And you're like, well, hey, if you choose this one, eventually you can get a flamethrower attached to your wrist. I'm like, yep, let's do that. So I picked up a couple of spells that I don't particularly care about, although one has proven useful.
hmm Both narratively and staying alive.
Yep. Uh, all right. So we're going to deliberately take an anecdote break. This character was created as a clockwork, and we would we were running through him like, wouldn't it be funny if he was like a necromancer? So it turns out he is a. This is mostly rolled. He is a clockwork, so basically an android with a human soul, uh, steampunk android who is a priest who is also an atheist. Ergo, he's a heretic, and as part of this, he also somehow can. He's a fledgling necromancer, which none of the other party knows yet. They don't know why he has a necromantic spell. I don't think they've realized where it comes from, but
Yeah,
it's hide from undead.
I don't think they've quite realized that, that even is a necromancy spell in this system, which is fantastic and
Yeah,
entirely on board.
which I remember I said, well, I didn't want to use this right away, but now I'm going to because we're being swarmed by a horde of zombies. So I cast it and just let everyone else run away, and I just casually walk behind them. And this is all because I want a flamethrower, which is from an entirely different path. But then I thought, wouldn't it be funny if the one spell I could choose from the necromancy path would be viable, which was hide from undead.
Hmm.
There was no other reason that we went down the necromancy path at the time, but now it might be more of a thing. Like that's indirectly influenced the direction of the character, which am a big fan of.
hmm
And again, that also goes back to the magic is you might have a single goal, but if there's another spell that, I'll take that because I can. I don't really need any of the other ones yet. That may be an accidental fortuitous bounce. That's going to end that anecdote. And the irony being, we had a defined end, beginning and end for the anecdote. Now,
Ooh.
it was pretty good, right? Now, you were talking about fuck. I can't remember what you were talking about. I think you had come to the end of your point.
Yes. So, bit of limbo. But no, I had just talked about how, like choosing your weaponry based
That's it.
on either a mechanical benefit that you want for your character or a stylistic or like fiction focused benefit of like, hey, I want this sword because it's cool, or I want this sword because it lets me do this.
Yeah, and I often wonder how much of that initial idea is like, wow, that was cool, but now I want to do this instead, comes into play.
Ah, that is an interesting one. I've definitely had some, and this is one of the major reasons why whenever I'm introducing people to either to a specific system or to RPGs as a whole, I very much tend to go, okay, after the first session, if you want to, retcon anything about your character, just talk to me and we can do that. Because there's a lot of times, like, even as an experienced role player, there's been times where it's like I'll think, oh hey, this like weapon or class or whatever looks really cool, and then I'll try it and immediately have a nope, I hate this.
Yeah, nope, this sucks. Can I
Yeah,
change it? No, you're stuck with it. Well, the hell with it then.
well, I guess this character is going to act like a suicidal idiot until he's dead. Yeah, nobody wins from that.
No. Well, no.
Yeah, no, just no. Playing a suicidal idiot character can work, but it's in the
It,
vein of, you better know what you're doing and the group as a whole better be okay with it.
well, and in fairness, I'm saying that as someone who is playing a character with a death wish in one of the games we have, but that's a very different style of he's not suicidal, he wants to go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah, which, man, that can lead to some fun stuff.
Yes. He's so far failed twice to go out in a blaze of glory despite throwing himself recklessly into a situation. But
But in terms of like, hey, what if I want to use this weapon and then later on I decide I want to use this weapon? That is something that was, oh, it was painful in like I started playing D&D and RPGs in general in the edition 3.5, which was very well known for its like ivory tower design. Like they had deliberately bad options to choose just because they wanted players to like get good at the game and realize that, oh, this is a bad option, I shouldn't take this. Which that's a design philosophy is all I'm going to say about that. But
you might say it's a design philosophy. I would say that's a fantastic way to turn off new players from not picking up the next edition.
oh, there's been a lot of people I know that went, but oh, but I really want to do this. This sounds really cool. It's like, yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of a trap option, and it sucks horrifically. So you will not have a good time if you're playing that. But one of the issues that really ran into it is like the to be good at a weapon, like actually good at a weapon, you had to devote so much of like your character design resources. Like, as a fighter, you would need to have your attributes set to be able to take advantage of that specific weapon. You'd need to take feats that were specifically focused around making that specific type of weapon very good, which is a good idea like in isolation, but when it comes to like, it's like, hey, the way this character is playing, like I don't really want him to be using like a sword anymore. It makes a lot more sense if like he started shifting over to using like a spear or like an axe or something like that, because your character is so mechanically focused on I am good with swords and swords are all I'm good at. Then it
Yeah,
either takes a lot of effort or just outright impossible to actually, transition your character over to being good at this thing instead. And instead of like, your warrior being able to go, hey, so I'm done with this weapon, I'm going to pick up this weapon because it's necessary for the situation, or I've just decided to start using this or what have you. It's like, okay, cool, but you're rolling all of your attacks at like, half the bonus and you're dealing half the damage, so you're functionally useless as a fighter in this scenario now. So, not fun at all. When you were playing a fighter in 3.5, you had a very specific, this is the one thing I am good at, and I'm hoping to God we never encounter a situation where this one thing doesn't work or I'm screwed.
wasn't didn't you end up playing a character once? I remember you talking about this, where you chose a specific type of magic, only to find out that every enemy was resistant to that kind of magic.
So that is a that is an interesting one because I kind of knew going in that this type of magic was going to be a problem because specifically we were playing a game that was like uh it was a Pathfinder module, Hell's Rebels, which is the entire concept of it is that this devil worshipping empire has pretty much taken over your city, and you're playing the feisty rebels fighting back and trying to free your city. And because I was more focused on like the narrative aspects of stuff, it's like, hey, I want to play like somebody who's like half devil or like has been like influenced by devils. He was originally part of this devil worshipping church before narrative shit happened, and he joined the rebels, and now he's working with them. But that also meant like the way the character worked, he primarily used fire magic, and devils in that system are either resistant or outright immune to fire magic. So it was very much it worked out just because they worship devils and they use devils a lot, but you're not always fighting devils all the time. You're fighting their soldiers, you're fighting other monsters, you're fighting all this stuff. So I
it,
knew going in that there were going to be combats where it's like, okay, I'm not going to be useful for fighting these like big bads, but because the system isn't quite as restricted as 3.5, even though the first one is 3.75 essentially.
you were able to get a bit more
Yeah,
enjoyment out of it.
it's like there's still things that I am capable of doing to assist. It's just my character is not going to be good in this fight. And like to bring it back to like weaponry stuff, if I had somebody who was spec'd entirely on being very good with a broadsword, and we got into combat with a bunch of aerial enemies and we had no way of bringing them down, it was like, hey, range attacks only. In like 3.5, if I'm a character that's spec'd entirely into melee combat, then when we get like a bunch of spellcasters flying around plinking us, then that character is literally useless. There's nothing they can do. But in games where you don't need to dedicate as much of your resources to a specific weapon, it's like, okay, they're flying around and like casting spells down on us. I'm going to sheath the sword and I'm going to pull out my bow, and I'm still going to be really functional with that weapon. Like I might not be as good, like I might not get my bonus sword damage, but I'm still going to be capable of meaningfully contributing to the combat.
That actually brings us very neatly to our next question, which folks listening may be like, wait, you've had a format? I thought you idiots were making it up as you went along, and mostly true. Improvising weapons. Now, I am using us as an example in that the clockwork we were speaking of previously, I had asked you at one point, like, can I buy oil flasks and light them and throw them at people?
Hmm.
And you said, sure. I'm like, great. So I'm now going to call this the Molotov because for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and you might want to figure out a damage option for that going in because that's not really an option in the game we're playing. Molotov isn't a thing. So you were fine with this and said, yeah, I'll come up with that later. And the very next, like within the next 5 minutes, it was an option that I was able to use. I'm like, I'm throwing a Molotov. You're like, fuck.
Okay, so I guess it'd be this type of throw and like this type of damage, and because the oil's going to spill everywhere, we'll say it's this and this, and cool, that'll work. Let's go with that for
So
now. I reserve the right to change it later.
now this then obviously opens up the question of how like improvising weapons obviously is a thing in real life, right? Like we've seen
Oh
people
yeah,
use pick up whatever they can in movies, etc.
in like any Jackie Chan movie.
Exactly. So how does that work as a GM when or as a player and a GM from your experience when someone's like, I want to do this, and you're like, oh shit.
Well, most combat-focused systems tend to have like an entry somewhere of like, hey, this is generally how much like a one-handed improvised weapon will do, or this is how much a two-handed improvised weapon will do. and you can use that as kind of a benchmark to decide, like, okay, hey, this guy's, I want to pick up a chair and smash it over his head. It's like, okay, so like, improvised weapons generally deal with this much. You're doing this. I can just say that's good and roll with it.
Yeah,
It
and
for
that makes
systems that
sense.
don't, then it's what I've done as a GM when someone's like, hey, we're in a bar fight and I want to like grab this chair and smash it over his head. It's like, okay, so like quick glance at the weapon chart, a dagger deals X amount of damage, or like in that one, I guess a club would be more what I'd be using as my reference point. It's like, hey, so like what listed weapon is like superficially close enough to this improvised weapon that I could say, hey, yeah, that's functionally working as this, but because it's not designed to be a weapon, like it might like shatter when you hit them with it. Like if you smash someone with a wooden chair, that wooden chair might bust into pieces when you hit them with it because it's a wooden chair. It's not designed to be used as a weapon. Or like if you're really good at like for time back, if your character's really good at swinging swords around, that's not really going to translate as much to swinging a chair at somebody, but
No.
you're still a trained fighter, so you're going to be better at swinging that chair than the Joe Blow peasant that you might be trying to take out.
So it's very much a not. I hate saying the word. Well, it's GM discretionary, but it's generally more up to the GM as to how they account for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a fine line to tread as the GM, where you want to encourage players to like take those more improvisational style options. Where it's like, yeah, I want to encourage my players to think in the fiction first. I don't want them to go, okay, we're getting into a bar fight, but swinging a chair would be mechanically terrible, so I don't want to do that. I guess I'll do this option instead. I want them to think, yeah, my character is totally the type of person who would stand up, grab his chair, and smash it over the other guy's head.
Which makes sense. So I think from the sounds of that, it's very much a you'll know what your play. In theory, by the time there's a bar fight, you should know what your players are more likely to do
Yeah,
versus what they're less likely to do, and you
it's
can gear it from that, right?
it's situations like that, because like a lot of GMs, and I'm definitely guilty of doing this. They'll like try to be really simulationist about it, or they'll be like, okay, so this weapon, like you're not really good at it, so you'll have penalties on this, and it won't do much damage, and da 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 da, and they'll like mechanically make it just a terrible thing to do because they're more focused on, okay, how would I mechanically, make this fit into the system more than, hey, this is something the character wants to do. How can I let them do it without it being like a ridiculously overpowered option? It's like you don't want to make it so easy that the character starts taking chairs with them just to start smashing people with them, unless you want to make an entire character around that. But you better hope that that tonally fits the game.
I was just going to say that actually would be kind of funny though,
Yeah.
if the character is, wait, this chair shit's really good.
Yeah, it's the balancing act as a GM whenever you need to improv the rules. You're walking that line of, you want to make it easy enough that you're incentivizing the characters to do that kind of thing, which is a really useful tool for like meta currencies, where you can say, hey, that was really cool, have a Benny or an inspiration or whatever you have, because that was really cool even if it wasn't very mechanically viable. I want to encourage that. Here you go.
Yeah,
And it's also something that I've run into, especially with like older school gaming, of if all of like the improvisational options are terrible, then you run into the problem of the players going, all right, so we just got back from a long day of adventuring. Our characters have cleaned up. All right, we're going down to the tavern to get something to drink, and we're going down in like our full armor with all of our weapons strapped to our sides, because if something happens, we need to be ready. And it's like, oh,
that's
you
not
realize
how
that
that's going to work.
narratively that is going to go very poorly for you, because you're a
Yeah,
bunch of unknown adventurers coming in from out of town strapped to the fucking gills
it's
going into the
yeah,
tavern. Nobody's going to like you.
it's one thing if you get down with your sword because that's I feel like that would be more narratively acceptable, but going down with like axes and spears and full armor may be a bit excessive, especially if you've unless you've just walked in. That
Yeah.
that obviously would be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, so, if you just come in off the road and you're like all grimy and banged up, and you're like, all right, we want to get a drink before we go do anything else, then yeah, sure, head into the tavern like fully equipped to kill. But if there's no narrative reason that your character would do that, and that immediately runs into the problem of players immediately pivoting to, oh, but my character is super paranoid and he always wants to be ready, so he has weapons on him at all times. Like, okay, but like if your character is walking around, like, even with a sword, like if even like modern day, if you're if you're downtown and you go to the bar to have a drink and the guy sitting next to you has a pistol strapped to his waist, that's going to put you a little on edge because there's a guy with a weapon sitting right next to you in the bar.
The irony is, for us, yes, that would put us significantly on edge because we're in a country, and myself are from countries where handguns are not common to see. In my case, anywhere, but especially in Canada now, unless it's on a police officer, you're not likely to see one.
Yeah.
I realize that some people listening, it's like, oh, I wouldn't care if someone had a gun strapped to their waist. Okay, fair. I am not that person, but I would still be on edge because of that. Now, this is one of those things where you had mentioned that narratively, a lot of stuff you need it to make sense narratively. What do you do when it does make sense narratively, and yet it's still one of those moments where like this makes no sense from a fiction standpoint, but yet I can see how you can almost justify having this thing. It occurs to me that at some point Anko has been disconnected in the last few minutes or last few seconds, so I'm going to make silence and try and get him back.
Haven't had that happen before.
Yeah, that was weird. I've seen it happen a couple of times, and it's funny. You started to say something and then went quiet, and I just jumped on your point. Like, as I'm speaking, like, I wonder if he's actually just disconnected completely.
And finished my thought, stopped, and heard nothing back, and I was like, huh, that
That's
doesn't normally happen. I need to check to
no.
see if I'm still online.
So I think the last thing that I recall you saying, we were just talking about a pistol in real life in a bar would be, for some folks listening, less worrisome than perhaps for you and I.
Yeah, and I was starting to say something along the lines of, yeah, no, I can get into that topic, but I don't want to because it's going to get political real quick and not be related to RPGs at all. But yeah, generally speaking, as the GM, I want to encourage people to be willing to use improvised weapons and like improvise the area around them for their character. But it's always just the fine line you need to tread of wanting to make that a viable option for them
And
versus
it becoming the best option for them.
yeah. Which, hey, if you want to play like a Jackie Chan movie style game where your characters are constantly running around fighting with like ladders and pots and that kind of stuff, being awesome, go for it. But just
that's a very specific type of game, and they are out there. There's
oh yeah,
like what's the game that we were talking about the last time? Some kind of action movie game where it's very much a case of
Feng Shui, I think.
Oh, maybe. Anyway, so the game that we're thinking of and can't name, there's very little rolling. It's a case of, hey, can I do this? Yeah, that works. And it's the number of doubles you roll, or the number of, so you might roll a whole bunch of ones, but as long as it makes sense and it's what you want to do, go for it.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting game mechanic, and I think it's one that we'll probably end up talking about once one or both of us have had the chance to play it.
Oh, Outgunned.
Outgunned. Yes, thank you. I was desperately trying to look it up, and I was thinking, I really hope Ango's already ahead of me on this.
Yeah, that is one of the ones that are on. Like, I'm sure we've referenced this before a number of times, but our group at hey, they're sponsored by us being to say they sponsor us being to say it name. At the Comic Con, or the place where we play, we tend to cycle through systems fairly rapidly compared to most groups, because most of us are, no, I shouldn't say most of us, like a solid half of us are GM heads who are constantly going, "Ooh, I want to try this system. Ooh, I want to try this system." And then we end up with a shelf of them, and most of them
and
don't get touched.
and I think
So
in we also have the unique opportunity, unique good thing with the word I can't think of, where it's not always the best. But say if you can't make it when you're GMing a game, and then one of the other people, oh, well, I'll be there. I'll GM. I'll play this game that we've been doing. So it's not
yeah,
uncommon to have 2 to 3 games ongoing at any one time, just purely because that's what people are available to play.
yeah. And generally, we'll have like, okay, so these are what we're playing right now. These are what we have in the chamber that are either coming up after we're done with these, or they're, hey, we can run this as a quick one-off when we have time. And like Outgunned is on that list. I'm really hoping to be a player in it, honestly, because I'd GM it, but I want to be a player in it.
I feel like there's the person who's got the game it wants to GM it because they've spoken about it quite a lot, like, and they're reading it and actively getting very into it. So I think it's more likely we're going to see them GM it than anyone else, but I could be wrong.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. All right. So we have spoken about choosing your weapons. So how do you start with a weapon? Choosing a different attack method, melee, ranged, and magic, and vaguely touched on certain things. And then we spent a bit of time improvising weapons. I didn't think we'd get near 40 minutes of talking about just weaponry with a tangent or two, but there we go. We have done that. Sorry, I would turn around and my cat was trying to open a drawer, and I don't know if he's strong enough to do it. But anyway, that's where we're at right now. Is there anything else we want to talk about or cover while we think of it, bearing in mind this is a topic that we did not plan, and we're
um,
again, it's
the
one of those things we can always circle back to. Maybe if we do an equipment building, character equipment building session or something.
the only thing that I would want to mention, kind of in related to general equipment, is there's certain systems that weaponry in RPGs tends to be on a very much sliding scale of like how mechanically dense it is. Like on one hand, you'll have systems where the weapons are entirely narrative and they don't have any real mechanical impact beyond, hey, does your character need a sword to be able to do this? Cool, you have a sword on your character so you can attempt this. And then there's other systems where each weapon will have different tags or damage types or what have you, and in the more like mechanically crunchy type systems, it can generally be a good idea to have a couple of types of weapons on you, because like if you're in a game that has like different types of defenses, like skeletons are resistant to slashing weapons but like they're weak to bludgeoning weapons, eventually you're going to get the idea that you're going to want to carry around like a sword and a hammer, and then
I,
use whichever tool in your toolbox is most relevant to the threat you're facing.
I suppose this would go back to improvised weaponry. But
Oh yeah, that
what if
that has definitely come up.
but what if the character pulls his sword out and then wraps a cloth around the bottom of the blade and uses the handle and the hilt and the crossbar as the hammer?
Oh, that has come up a few times in our games, and it's always a tricky one to kind of finesse, because like on one hand you don't want to make the dedicated option less effective than the improvised option, because like if you can just wrap the cloth around and go to town, why would you never need to own a hammer? Then the person owning a hammer is going to feel bad because they can't just like strap a edge onto their hammer and get around the bludgeoning issue.
One could argue the pick at the back of the hammer. Anyway, they could get piercing damage, but so in my inexperienced mind, I feel that you could do something along the lines of, sure, you can wrap a cloth around, but every attack you're going to give me, you're going to roll a high low to see if the cloth splits and you take damage on your fingers. If you
Yeah,
take
or
too
like
much damage, you're going to lose a finger or two.
generally speaking, how I tend to handle that kind of thinking is I'd just go with like, hey, you're gonna take like a minor penalty to your attack and your damage rolls, system dependent on how that actually works. But it's like I'm gonna give you a minor disadvantage on your swinging and how much damage you're dealing, because like, yes, technically speaking it's possible, but the weapon's not designed to be used that way.
Yeah, which
And
makes sense.
yeah, and then if like you did like get a critical fail or like whatever the system supports in the vein of like something bad happens when you attack, then it might be yeah, so like the sword like slips from your grasp because you're holding it wrong, or like it cuts into you because you're holding onto the blade or something along those lines. But generally speaking, how I just tend to go, hey, all right, we're going to put a minor penalty on both of those to represent that it's not as effective. But hey, now you're no longer dealing with the resistance, so you've gotten around it. But the guy that's swinging the warhammer still feels really good because he's got the bludgeoning weapon and he's just
Yeah,
able to go to town on them.
which makes complete sense. And I think that this is one of those moments where you've got to, like you say, build in the how the players themselves feel about the attacks they're making and the characters they're playing. Because, as you said, if you can just wrap something around the bottom of a sword and be just as effective as someone with a warhammer,
Hmm.
well, then why would anyone have anything but a sword that you can just flip around,
Yeah.
right? Or why would you have a warhammer when you can have an axe and just I'm going to hit them with the back of the axe?
And it can get interesting too, especially when it comes to like customizing your weapons in more like mechanically abstract systems. I've run into the problem a few times where like hey, this character is playing with like a quarterstaff, and the player's like, hey, can I like strap something to the top of it to make it heavier so it does more damage? And I was like, okay, like that's an interesting idea, and I want to encourage interesting ideas, but at the same time, like the system itself isn't mechanically dense to make a difference. And
Uh,
it's like, okay, like the system is abstract enough that the difference between you doing that and not doesn't actually have any mechanical impact to it. And you can't really give it a mechanical impact, because even if you gave it like a +1 to damage, then oh, now it's just as good or better than the weapons that are a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult to use. And then the
it
person who's put the work in to use those feels bad because the guy who
yeah,
barely has anything just strapped a bit of metal to it and went to town.
and I feel like at that point well, you can strap it, but now it's going to be a less effective naginata, the
Yeah.
Japanese long spear sword thing. Like it's one of those things, like as a GM, like it's very difficult, I would assume, to be able to effectively balance what people want to do, what they can do, and what makes sense in terms of the other people enjoying the game. Because sure, you can absolutely, in a genuine fantasy setting, strap a sword to the end of a long pole, and then you have a giant spear sword, which would be more difficult to use,
Hmm.
but no
And you
less effective than an actual spear in some ways.
and in other ways, you'd need to worry about it breaking off the end or getting twisted off or what have you. But when the fiction, when the mechanics aren't dense enough to really make that a meaningful difference,
How do you account
exactly.
for that? Yeah, I think that more or less brings us to a close before we start another topic that we're going to potentially want to get into a bit more, which is the I don't know if intricacies of game mechanics is something we want to get into more down the road or not. That may be a far more advanced subject than I'm ready for, but we'll see how that goes. Folks, as we mentioned previously in the last episode, the last 9 or 10 episodes have quotes in them. If you can tell us where they're both from, we will send you something. We know what we're going to send you now at this point. We will tell you at some point. We're going to leave it open to episode 15, which should, in theory, allow everyone a chance to do that. And you
Hmm.
can email us at readynerdgo@gmail.com. with your answer. I don't know. Put something in the subject line that makes sense. We we're not that far ahead yet. And if no one does, then that's fine. But we'll see how it goes. And we
Exactly.
with with that said, I don't know if there's anything else left to say other than
Game on.
Hey, thanks for watching Board Game today. We always appreciate your views and your support, but there are so many ways for you to support our site. Not only can you do it right here on video, but you can go and check us out at boardgametoday.com, where we have more news, reviews, interviews, everything you could ever want. But since you're here, if you could, you can always give us a like, subscribe, or share our videos or watch something else. Is always much appreciated, and get your game on.